We're going to move to AB 1316, and I'm going to hand the gavel to Mr. McCarty. I know you, or Mr. Kiley, I apologize, Mr. Kiley. I know you wanted to make a statement about some limitations, et cetera. So
Oh, sure. I'll will follow the protocol set out by the chair, but I do want to renew my objection to the limits on public testimony that are happening in this committee and have started happening in other committees. And I also think more broadly, and this is not your rule, it's the Assembly's decision, that it's kind of time to start letting the public back into the building in a more meaningful way so that we can have, you know, public participation as we have had and is a right protected in the Constitution, especially as we have folks going to Kings games down the street. So I would encourage, you know, the leadership of the Assembly to start to move us back towards a more meaningful process of public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley, and I appreciate that this situation we find ourselves in is not perfect. I agree with you on that. It's been frustrating to me a bit, but I just do want to note we follow these protocols this year for every bill, every hearing. We haven't changed them for any bill, and I just as chair need to remain consistent. But again, I appreciate your frustration and do hope that we start to reopen as our positivity and case rates fall dramatically. The best state in the nation right now as far as not having so much COVID, et cetera. So that's a good thing, and I think we need to respond to that. So thank you. With that, this is yours. And do you need, I don't know if you need, oh, you may, I'll let you consult with her, okay. Let me head down. Yeah, it's 10, 10, and 10.
Yep.
So, and you probably have 10 here.
So 10 in the room,
10 in the room, 10, 10.
Okay.
10, 10.
And I'll keep time, and I have a thing to show you.
This is AB 1316 by Assemblymember O'Donnell.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I start, just as I make my comments today, I'll lay them out in a way, more or less, where I'll cite a problem and a solution. What you won't hear me say when I cite problems is online charter schools and solutions, shut them down. Okay, that's not what this bill is about. This bill is about creating more oversight, accountability, and even increasing some audits to ensure that students are succeeding and public money is spent wisely. That's what this is about. Again, just for an editorial, I think online learning is not going away. I think we've learned that even more over the last year. It hasn't been real successful, quite frankly. I think we would all acknowledge that. But for some students, it may be successful. And so what we need to do is kind of bring it in to the year 2021, create some good government practices around it, and move forward. So with that, Mr. Chair and committee members, the bill before you today seeks to do three things. Ensure all children have access to a quality education, whether it be a traditional brick and mortar school or an online school. 2, to protect public money through good government policies such as audits, transparency, and strong accountability and school accountability practices for online charter schools, just as they are for traditional school operations and other governmental agencies that are stewards of public money. Also, to stop the well-documented fraud among many non-classroom-based charter schools and improve the quality of education students receive in these schools by ensuring that the money they receive is for educational purposes, not to line the pockets of those who wish to steal public money, which in some cases we have seen. I am a firm believer that an in-person education setting serves students best, but fully recognize that some students do thrive in an online setting, and we must offer this alternative approach in California. Again, if you want to shut down online charter schools across the state of California, this bill is not for you. If you want to improve them, this bill is for you. I believe online learning is not going away, and I am not trying to eliminate it, but we must fortify it with expectations of quality and accountability and get rid of the fraud that has been long associated with this type of learning. The fact is that the 1992 charter school law never contemplated online charter schools. So there's relatively minimal statutory guidance and oversight of this type of schooling. There just isn't a lot of law out there, and people have taken advantage of that. It is time to end the Wild West, provide true oversight, stop the fraud, and end all of the negative hype and scandals associated with this approach to learning. So issue number 1, fraud or theft of public money by manipulating or doctoring student attendance data. This is happening. How do we address it? We fortify the statutes that speak to school attendance. There are many examples of fraud we can cite. There are many examples of fraud across our state. Today we will share one case in particular from San Diego. This example will be shared by the San Diego District Attorney's Office. This fraud was promulgated by the now defunct A3 charter school network, which defrauded taxpayers and children by stealing the identities of Little League players in order to bill the state for an education they never provided. This charter network used each child's information to enroll them in their charter schools over the summer. The charter school never provided any instruction to these children. In fact, the parents had no idea their children were ever enrolled in a charter school. Yet they collected attendance funding from the state for those children as though they did attend that school. The A3 charter school network used another scheme to collect even more funding. They moved students between their schools and manipulated their calendar, using multi-track year-round scheduling to draw down far more than one school year of attendance funding per student. And at one point, some of the folks that were defending some of the individuals in A3, I saw this in the media, as I recall, they defended what they did was legal because there was no law that said it wasn't legal. So we need to close this gap. With this bill, we will close the loopholes and end this type of fraud, the A3 type of fraud and other types of fraud, by ending the use of multi-track year-round schedule for both districts and charter schools unless they truly have facility challenges, improving charter authorizer oversight of charter school attendance, establishing training for both school district and charter school auditors, and requiring auditors to look more closely at student attendance, prohibiting private religious organizations or schools from serving as vendors at charter schools, requiring a study to connect the CalPAD system to the attendance funding system. And we will have Michael Fine here from FCMAT who will specify that a little bit more, but we need to see what students are where so that they're not getting counted in 2 different places at once and getting funding at 2 different school systems at once. This bill also creates an inspector general to investigate fraud and abuse in any school district or charter school operation across our state. And again, the inspector general would not solely focus on charter schools. No, it would be for all schools in the state of California. Issue number 2. We need to ensure that online education is focused on student success. How do we address it? We bolster teacher and student accountability. We bolster teacher and student accountability and professional standards. The quality and outcomes of independent study at non-classroom-based charters needs to improve. Studies by the University of Oregon, Stanford, and Vanderbilt all show that students in online schools significantly underperform academically compared to students taught in traditional classrooms. The Stanford study showed that students in non-classroom-based charter schools made so little progress in math that it was as if the students had not attended school for an entire year. The data is clear. Many students that attend an online charter school perform poorly. Study after study has shown this. The state has an affirmative duty to address this issue by bolstering teacher and student accountability. Currently, teachers in independent study programs have no minimum requirement for how often they interact with their students. They could see them as little as once per semester. Given that the typical online school student is not performing at grade level, this is an atrocity. This practice cannot be defended. Students in non-classroom-based charter schools are often receiving a subpar education. Some students in these charter schools receive instruction from people who are not credentialed. It is possible they have no high school diploma or college education. They often have not even passed a state-level background check. This raises serious skill set and safety concerns for our students. An online school vendor could be teaching math with no understanding of the topic, nor how to teach it. An online school vendor could have a criminal background, but with no background check, who would know? With this bill, we seek to address the quality of independent study programs in both school districts and charter schools, by establishing a minimum frequency of teacher and student interaction, requiring vendors to have a credential if their services count toward instructional minutes. This provides parity with all other charter schools and school districts today. Establishing a minimum school day for charter schools like school districts. This is parity. Requiring schools to have an in-person option to serve special education students and struggling students who need in-person instruction and support to succeed. Establishing metrics for ending a student's independent study agreement when the school is not meeting the needs of the student. Again, that's for charter and traditional schools. Let me walk through some of the arguments we have heard from opponents of this bill. Opponents will tell you that we did not engage them in writing this bill. That is absolutely false. My staff had several meetings with charter school organizations this winter. I believe it was more than 10. Meetings were held with a variety of stakeholders, including online charter schools. In fact, we asked the charter community for their ideas on how to stop this fraud. They came up with nearly nothing on how to address the theft of taxpayer dollars, nor a path to ensuring academic success for online school students. This bill is the result of years of observation and discussion and recognition that the online charter school arena is rife with fraud, a lack of accountability, and poor academic outcomes. Opponents of the bill will argue that the bill is really an effort to stop or close online schools and limit parent choice. This bill will not close a single charter school. Let me repeat that. This bill does not require the closure of a single online charter school. In fact, this bill strengthens parent choice by making non-classroom-based charters more accountable, transparent, and of higher quality. The current system is inequitable. All public school students should have access to a credentialed and background check teacher. Students in non-classroom-based charters are not being given access to credentialed teachers in their core and non-core instruction. Further, shouldn't they have background checks to ensure student safety? Opponents have argued that this bill makes draconian cuts. The truth is, fully virtual schools do not have brick and mortar buildings to pay for, nor do they have or need the personnel that would be required to operate those buildings. The funding formula in this bill will provide less funding to fully virtual programs and more state funding to programs that provide a hybrid model, since these programs cost more to operate. If you have a building, you have an office manager, you have a janitor, whomever you have working on that site costs more money than it would for an online school that doesn't have facilities. So facilities cost money. Opponents will tell you that this bill is too burdensome to the upstanding charter schools due to a single bad actor. The fraud perpetuated by non-classroom-based charter schools goes far beyond the A3 charter case. Fraud has been alleged at A3 Valiant, Inspire, Cava, Epic, Tri-Valley, Magnolia, and Celerity. There are more. Other states are also seeing poor academic outcomes and fraud related to non-classroom-based charter schools, and they are taking action. We must do the same. Opponents will tell you that this bill breaks the agreement on AB 1505. Not at all. The truth is that AB 1505 created a 2-year moratorium on these schools precisely so that we could study them and bring forward reforms before the moratorium expired. The plan was always to come back with reforms, and that is why we are here today. As we studied non-classroom-based charter schools and identified the problems, we created solutions to stop the potential fraud in all public school settings. That is why parts of this bill apply to school districts as well as charter schools. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Opponents will tell you that we only need to beef up auditing to stop this fraud. No, we need to do much more. Ask any auditor. Ask Mr. Fine, who'll be up here shortly, from the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team when he testifies, and he will tell you that auditing alone will not solve these problems. Opponents will tell you that the bill ends student flexibility as to when they can complete their work. That is false. The amendments taken today will clarify that the existing CDE regulations will be rewritten. Students in charter schools will have the same flexibility as independent students in school districts. And I think that probably pertains to a parent who might have a child that is in sports and might be performing that sport during the day or practicing that sport, and they might need to complete their instruction in some non-traditional hours. What we're saying is here, we seek to accommodate that. We seek to allow them to continue to do that. Opponents of the bill will tell you that their student performance is lower because they serve at-risk students. Non-classroom-based charters do not serve a student body that is reflective of our state. They serve significantly fewer at-risk students, including low-income and English learner students. And according to the research, students in online schools underperform in every demographic group compared to their peers in classroom-based schools. Opponents will say that small school districts are not problematic authorizers. The truth is, these districts are so small that the superintendents are both the bus drivers and the math teachers. In a few districts, the number of charter students they oversee is far greater than the number of their in-district enrollment. For example, a school district with 22 students has been authorized for a 4,500 student charter school. So in other words, a school district that has 22 students is overseeing a charter that has 4,500 students. And you're not going to have the infrastructure necessary to oversee 4,500 students if you only have 22 students in your school district. A district with 1,000 ADA has authorized 13,500 charter school ADA. And I think in the San Diego A3 case, if I remember off the top of my head correctly, they had 140 students in their school district, yet they had authorized a charter to have 20,000 students. They couldn't oversee that. That's how that whole theory, that's part of the reason, one of the reasons only, that the whole A3 scenario happened. So in closing, I accept the committee's amendments. We received letters from parents suggesting that we should focus on auditing reforms and reforms to independent study. We agree. This bill does both. The legislature must clean up non-classroom-based charters to protect California's investment in public education to benefit all of our children. And with me today is one of the joint authors of the bill, Assemblymember Christina Garcia.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for working on this. The public got to know me through BASTA and the City of Bell fighting corruption. And in my 9 years here, we've done a lot of audits in that area, and my area keeps being the corridor of corruption. And a lot of the same things we saw 10 years ago, 11 years ago in the City of Bell are happening in neighboring cities, because an audit is not enough. Turns out that a new scandal and 10 people going to jail wasn't enough either to deter other people from following the same bad practices out there. And so I've been following these issues for a while in San Diego and been appalled by the abuse that we have seen by A3 and others, and also been appalled as a member who represents a low-income community of color where students are not using tax dollars to go to Disneyland, and are having just a hard time even paying for basic things like paper and pencils and so forth. To know that we have this inequity is particularly hard for me. Online schools are here. They're here to stay. We know that before the pandemic, and the pandemic has made that clear. But because they are here to stay and because they are growing, I think it's ever more important that we take action now to make sure we have a system that's equitable, accountable, and transparent, and fair to all the taxpayers out there, which is why I'm here in support of AB 1316. I have more comments, but I will, our lead author here made a good job of talking about the bill and addressing some issues. I will be here to ensure and answer questions. I just want to state that it's important for me that we protect the parents' right to homeschool their child if that's their choice, and this bill still preserves that. But it has to be in a way that does not affect or is to the detriment of other students in our state. This bill ensures that service providers to students are of the highest quality and no less quality than service providers in classroom-based charter schools out there. We will be hearing from Leon Shore from the San Diego District Attorney's Office and Mike Fine from FIGMAT that are here to testify and also help answer questions. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. I believe the first witness, Leon Shore, is here in the room. You may proceed when ready.
Good morning. My name is Leon Shore. I'm a Deputy District Attorney. I run the Public Integrity Division of the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, prosecuting individuals who steal public funds. Our goal is to share information about the current gaps in the system that led to a case of massive fraud. To date, we have recovered over $230 million education dollars. We want to be very clear. Our office supports legally run charter schools. They can be a great option for parents and students. However, seeing the continued threat to education dollars being diverted from kids, we presented our findings to the CDE and the Assembly Education Committee. We highlighted glaring problems in conjunction with FICMAT, specifically based on our observations in the massive fraud. There are large gaps in the state's oversight. Our prosecution is ongoing, and for that reason, we cannot speak to many of the aspects of the case. Additionally, we want to stay in our lane of public safety, simply pointing out where the government is vulnerable to fraud. The state does not monitor the money that goes for each student's education. Government regulators rely on auditors to confirm the accuracy of attendance and expenditures of at all public schools, but for charter schools, the auditors work in an at-will capacity, lack the tools, knowledge, and authority to find fraud if it is occurring. Government regulators do not monitor individual student attendance at charter schools and are currently paying out more than one ADA per student in many cases without knowing that they're doing so. The CDE has no authority to investigate potential fraud and needs the ability to do so. Only a rare DA's office has the resources to do so. Our office only wants to promote good public policy that prevents fraud, protects taxpayers, and supports education. Our experience has taught us that when oversight is lax, fraud will flourish. When fraud occurs in the area of public funding of education, our schools lose, our parents lose, and our students lose. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Fine.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask a question of the district attorney?
If it's quick, otherwise we do when committee members ask questions. If you have one of those up at the mic, that's great.
Thank you. In your experience, do you sense that the fraud goes beyond A3? That's my question.
Yes.
Great. I'll keep it brief.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Michael Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Good morning to you. I'm Michael Fine, Chief Executive Officer of the state's Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team. It was FICMAT's pleasure to serve as technical advisors to the authors in considering several of the topics that are addressed in the bill before you. FICMAT has been called upon to audit or otherwise participate in the investigations of several non-classroom-based charter schools over the years. As such, we have built an understanding and expertise on a variety of the topics addressed in the bill before you. I'd like to address first the topic of audit quality. And deviating from my written comments just briefly, given the author's comments, I think it's important for us to remember that it is the governing body of the charter school or the school district or the county office of education that is first and foremost the responsible party for conducting their business in a legal way and in a transparent way and in a way that complies with our regulations and the standards that we have. It's not the auditor's job to do that. Auditors are fairly limited in the work and the scope that they do to produce an annual financial audit. Their primary purpose is to produce the financial statements related to that entity, whether that's a school district or a county superintendent or a charter school. Sections 1, 2, 8 through 11, 22, 25, and 26 of the bill deal with the topic of audits and recommend amendments to existing provisions that would increase audit consistency and quality for all local educational agencies. Sections 22, 25, and 26 specifically deal with changes to charter schools that bring the audit process for charter schools in alignment with school districts and county offices of education. The bill proposed makes common sense changes. It's not an overreach by any means. And again, it aligns our expectations for all local educational agencies, whether they are a government entity such as a school district or county superintendent, or they are private entities such as a charter school. There are three basic topics addressed in these sections on audit. First is auditor training, specific to auditors who conduct audits of LEAs. We address this in the context of existing CPA licensure and continuing ed requirements. We don't go outside that existing structure. Audit firm peer review, likewise using the existing structure that's in place set by the Board of Accountancy here in California. We work within that.
Summarize, Mr. Fine?
Sure.
Due to time, thank you.
FCMAT was asked also today by committee staff to speak to funds that are given by charter schools to parents from their allocation of the local control funding formula and what those are used for. Looked at a variety of those. In one charter school's case, one network's case, they have 7,000 vendors that the parents can pick from to deliver service such as individual music lessons, horseback riding, CrossFit membership, golf resort services, animal care, martial arts, gymnastics as an example. Happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now go to opposition witnesses. And we have, on the opposite side, we have Myrna Castion from the California Charter School Association and Kate Ford, Board President of Santa Barbara Unified School District.
Good morning. I'm Myrna Castrejon. I'm the President and CEO of the California Charter Schools Association, here to represent the charter school community's strenuous opposition to AB 1316. CCSA has a very strong record on accountability. We blew the whistle on the criminals of the A3 scheme in 2018 and called on the CDE and superintendent to investigate and take appropriate and immediate action. But this bill is not about accountability, and nor is it about parity. The bill actually discriminates against charter students by slashing non-classroom-based funding by 30%, but not for districts with independent study programs. AB 1316 also falls far short of holding authorizers accountable. So you just heard Mr. Fine speak to that. In fact, it actually doubles down on the perverse incentives of increased oversight fees, which we know that motivated unscrupulous authorizers in the past. More importantly, this bill eliminates student-centered, flexible schedules and the discretion necessary for teachers and paraprofessionals to meet student needs. Further, AB 1316 unravels that historic compromise shepherded by Governor Newsom in 2019 by relitigating settled issues related to site-based schools, despite the fact that the regulations for implementing these new laws have not even yet been initiated. How can we fully engage when recent legislative agreements are being dismissed and punitive approaches against an entire sector are being advanced in this bill? This bill targets families who've been failed by site-based settings. These charters do serve a highly mobile student population, up to 17%, and we're still talking about a fraction of the whole student body of California, less than 3%. So for the pregnant or the working teen or the migrant student who follows the crops or the students with disabilities who have flocked to personalized learning programs in the pandemic, AB 1316 will strain and even foreclose opportunities for these students to receive the education they deserve. These are our most vulnerable students. This is not equity, and this is not California. We respectfully asked for your no vote, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. To our next witness in opposition.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Ford, and I'm currently the president of the Santa Barbara Unified School Board. After 43 years in education, I believe that as a principal of public and charter schools, as a superintendent overseeing 11 charter schools, and now as an authorizer in my role on the school board, my perspective might be helpful to you with respect to the overreach exhibited in AB 1316. My experience both in Los Angeles and here in Santa Barbara is that the current systems in place, though not perfect, are comprehensive, time-intensive, and helpful to both the charters and the authorizers. I support regulations or processes that prevent situations like the reprehensible A3 fraud in San Diego. But my experience with NCB charters is that they fill a specific need, have very strong parent and teacher support, are well managed, and have good relationships with their auditors and authorizing districts. The even bigger picture is that AB 1316 makes it nearly impossible to operate charter public schools. And this kind of broad stroke is simply destructive. It's notable that the small group of supporters of this bill does not include the California School Boards Association, doesn't include the Association of California School Administrators, nor does it include the thousands of public school district employees across the state who send their children to charters. I think that's quite telling, since by law, no child can be forced to attend a charter school. AB 1316 is an attempt to cripple charter schools with additional costs, reduce revenue, and new regulations that would make the very fabric of, the vision for charter schools nearly impossible. Our 1,300 charter schools are not mired in fraud and should not be treated as such. Instead, why not work together to strengthen the support and oversight for authorizers and charters alike so that the 650,000 charter school students and families are well served? That must be the goal. AB 1316 does not do that, and so I respectfully ask that you vote no on AB 1316. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We will now go to committee member questions.
I have some. I hope that you'll indulge me with a little bit of time as I have several questions. I do want to state for the record that I have spent quite a bit of time in the last few weeks and seen this bill talking to both sides. I appreciate the author's comments trying to clarify some of the statements that we've been told. I do have, this is a major bill with many, many components, as we've all seen. I would say that just from seeing legislation now, this going into my 7th year, I would have liked to see this put into several bills, as it's really addressing many, many issues. That being said, it's in one bill. But I will start with, I've heard that there was very little interaction between the opposition and the author, and I have seen a record of many, many meetings that have taken place since January. So again, I'm trying to state for the record some of the major things I've heard. As you know, there's two sides to an issue, and sometimes we get one perspective, and yet there's another, and sometimes the truth lies in the middle. So I have heard that there were several meetings that have taken place since January related to this. Some of my major questions revolve around the 30%, and so I'm going to address this to either author or even one of our witnesses here, that this 30% will in fact put charter schools out of business, and again related to the ADA. So I would just put that out there if somebody can explain exactly what is implied by. So on the ADA, that's my first question, and the 30% reduction.
So I'll be answering questions for the committee, and I will be asking some of our witnesses to back up on some of these, since our other author is chairing now.
Right.
So we have at least 5 other states that already reduced funding for virtual schools, and it hasn't shut down any of the schools in those states as well. As we heard from our lead author earlier, they do not have the same cost with brick and mortar or with additional staff like custodians and so forth. And so not clear that they need that additional, that extra 30% there.
So they typically, a school would be funded on ADA per student, and that per student in a public school would be 100% as they attend an in-classroom school. That not only pays for, of course, your credentialed teachers, your administration, your custodians, your all paraprofessionals that are on the staff. If a student is now attending a non in-person classroom without a physical space, then the point of this alteration in this bill would to say then they should not be getting 100% of ADA, as there is not a brick and mortar location that they need to use that additional 30% for. Is that pretty much?
That's correct.
All right, so then the next question.
I apologize. If I could add one more thing. Some of these schools are spending $3,500 that they're giving to parents at the discretion to spend however they want. And you're seeing things like they're paying for equestrian classes, or they're paying for trips to Legoland. We had a family go to Chicago. I think it speaks to the fact that they do not have the same overhead and do not have the same money, so they could afford to do something that we can't do in traditional schools or in brick and mortar schools. I think my parents in my district would gladly take those $3,500 to pay for basic things that their students need, but that's not offered to them.
Thank you. Then the next
And
area.
Ms. Garcia, if just to point something out, right now that formula is actually built into current law, just isn't current practice for the most part. That 70% threshold. Yeah.
All right.
And if you look inside the analysis here, it lays out the basically a progressive funding model for how schools get money. Let me give you an example. I'll start at the bottom here. Pupils engaged in classroom-based instruction between 0 and 19% of their attendance generate 70% for state apportionment. Okay. Now it goes all the way up. Pupils, and I'm going to jump ahead, but pupils engaged in classroom-based instruction for at least 80% of their attendance generate 100% of attendance for state apportionment. So there's a schedule for how often a student is in a classroom, and that aligns with whether or not they're brick and mortar, whether or not the student is even in the classroom. So if a student never goes to school, there's again not the need for the facility, and that's, if you look at the analysis, that's what guides the funding model.
And there are some students who are doing working with the charter school, and they do have a hybrid where they do go to a brick and mortar.
That is accommodated in the schedule. That is
and
recognized.
sometimes,
yes.
All right. So then the next question that I've heard quite a bit about, and I am very interested to understand, is the, as you call, a multi-year calendar. And again, I am a complete believer that parents and even adults, well, young adults who are in high school, have many, many needs. And as was mentioned by one of the speakers, could be migrant workers, could be teen pregnancies, could be just their choice to not be in a traditional school. But what about this issue related to the multi-calendar funding and the ADA that follows with that student? It's not very clear on exactly what that means.
So a student can still enroll whenever they want, year-round. And as the chair said, there's still flexibility in how the schedules are set up here along the way, and he's taking clarifying amendments to make that clear for individuals. Schools can still control their own schedule, and so I would actually ask Mr. Mike Fine to elaborate on that.
I think a couple thoughts on multi-track. Number one, the issue that's trying to be addressed is where students are allowed to jump from track to track to ultimately generate more than one ADA per year at the state's expense. As the co-author has just spoken to, calendar is set by the local school, school district or charter school in this case, and this provision is applicable to both. They can, the state law sets a minimum number of days instruction, not a maximum. And so if a student were to enroll, quote unquote, late in the year, the charter school can continue to serve them. We serve kids during the summer in other environments, whether we call that summer school or extended year or what have you. But there is a maximum number of days in current law that the state pays for. That's not a limiting factor on the number of days, though, that a student can be served. So those are some considerations.
Just give me an example of, at worst, practice where there is this scenario where ADA could be collected more than once in a year for a student. How has that been occurring?
So in a multi-track year-round, let's just assume there's 4 tracks. Each of them start at different points. Current law does require that they must all have started by a certain date or all have reached so many days by a certain date in the year. So you wouldn't typically be starting a track in January, as an example. So multiple tracks, you could start July 1. In the case of A3, to give you a specific example, they enrolled students on track 1 on July 1 while they were attending Little League games and practices as ADA, basically. And then the student moved later in the year to another track to maximize, or they went back to their home school district and they were served for the regular school year by that home school district. Ultimately, the state paid more than one ADA for that student.
Can I also ask the DA to elaborate on these examples?
I'm sorry?
Can we also ask the district attorney to elaborate?
Thank you.
On this
And
issue?
just for Mr. Fine's up there, could he just also speak to how the introduction of CalPads would address some of this issue?
Sure. The provisions in the bill are that as the state looks to, for lack of a better term, CalPads 2.0, CalPads is the state's longitudinal data system that you're aware. FCMAT is the state's contractor, awkward relationship since we're also a state, a component of the state, but we're the state's contractor to the CDE that operates that system, and so we know it very, very well. The bill provides that as they look to future CalPads work, that they would align ADA with CalPads so that you actually see at the state level ADA per student. So CalPads does report on an individual student basis, but not ADA for apportionment purposes. That's done on an individual student basis at the school, district, charter school level, but does not float up to the state. When it floats up to the state, it's just a total. You lose visibility of the individual student. And so to see when a student's enrolled and not, you can see that in CalPads, but not know their attendance except at a very high level, including for reporting on chronic absenteeism.
So in essence, I think what you're saying is it would be if a district and a charter, per se, were both scoring that student for ADA, it would be caught.
Yes.
The provision of the bill would catch that, the CalPads provision.
You would have visibility at the state level of that activity, yes, sir.
Right. And I believe you wanted the San Diego DA
Yes.
and again, I just want to clarify that they're here to really speak to their experience, and what they can share is limited with A3 and some other criminal investigations. They're probably not going to go too far into some of the technical elements of the bill because that's not what they came up for today.
Correct. So I want to make sure that I'm answering the question that's asked, though.
The question was asked if you could give some examples of how the double dipping with ADA has occurred.
Okay, and so not addressing the policy of whether multi-track is good or bad, but what we found in the case was specifically, like Mr. Fine explained, you would have a student, for instance, Steve A., that is enrolled in a traditional school for the school year. They're entitled to one ADA in a traditional brick and mortar school or in a charter school. If they want to go full time for the entire year, for instance, take summer school, your one ADA would have to be stretched for the entire year. If you switched from one school district to another school district, or if you switched from one charter school to another school district, and the state currently has no ability to actually follow your switch, you can end up receiving your one ADA plus an additional percentage of ADA for the summer school or whatever part of the school that you went to. So what we found in our case is that in order to maximize profits, you would switch from one school, or one track to another. That doesn't mean that all charter schools by any stretch are doing that, or that any multi-track folks are doing it, but that's what we found in that case. Does that make sense?
When you said your case, are you speaking about A3 specifically?
Correct.
So, is it okay? Sorry.
Can you elaborate on how many other investigations you have ongoing right now besides A3?
No,
You can't elaborate, or there are other investigations?
I can't elaborate.
Okay.
So I'll just finish up my question so as parents choose their education for their own children, whether it's public or private or charter or online or in person, or they enroll their kids just as you would with any type of application, but the whole ADA part is not really in their purview. They're not the ones that are responsible for tracking attendance, for even letting a district know if they're going to move somewhere else. That's up to the district to follow that ADA, if you want to say it that way. So I'm just making a statement that in no way do I believe that parents are knowingly trying to double dip, if you want to say. And I'll also make the comment that, yes, there's bad apples in whether if we want to say A3, if we want to say public education, under all our institutions, and that this bill, as I'm understanding it more, is to try to create the parity and accountability so that all of our education institutions, again, whether it's online charter, whether it's in traditional in-class, has parity and equity. So I guess I really didn't ask you a question, I just made a
Perfect.
statement. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will point out, when I asked the district attorney earlier, he did say that there were other cases.
Correct.
Not that he was doing the investigation, but he believed that there was other instances of fraud out there. Right?
And we have the A3 case that we've had Inspire, and there's been a lot of coverage on that in the newspapers. Cava, Tri-Valley, Magnolia, and Celerity are some of the additional schools or districts where we've seen fraud.
Yes, because I believe there's many more than that. And during my tenure here in the state legislature, we pay attention to these situations. We pay attention to the articles that come through, and there's been many more than that. But with that, further comments from the committee. Mr. McCarty.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just blown away by this example in San Diego. And granted, the opponents to this will say, well, that's just one bad apple, not all of us, and I'll get to that in a second. But how did they get the information? This whole where did the representative go? There you go. So they used some type of Little League registration information. So can you walk me through how that all transpired?
Some of it I can. So the initial contact that we received was from a Little League that was concerned about what they thought was grant funding that was going to come to them. A3 organization had hired individuals to recruit students to come in for the summertime. So what these recruiters did, and were paid to do so, was went and signed up Little League sports programs, all sorts of summer programs, and enrolled them, oftentimes without the individual's knowledge, into a charter school. The recruiter would receive an amount of money for doing so, and then the Little League, for instance, might receive $25 per student, where the recruiter might get $200 per student, and then the bad actor charter school would receive anywhere between $2,000 and $4,000 per student. So obviously, we had $2,000 or $4,000 going into a Little League program that provide educational services, I don't think anyone would have been as upset by it, but instead it was going to the providers.
Yeah, that just blows my mind, and thank you for articulating that. And it's just like the old examples of people going to the phone book and registering voters and
Right.
going and getting your bounty. That's just flat out fraud. I do have.
But real quick, just let me come back. I don't know what the DA's office can say, but this is my understanding of that specific case. That one of the individuals actually lives in Long Beach, my town, and they found a small school district out in eastern San Diego County. I believe it had 140 ADA, and then grew it to 20,000, right? And this guy, believe even one of them came from Australia, and came over here and set up this operation and stole $50 million plus inside 2 years, something like that. So this is a big, big operation and a big, big deal, and no one caught it because there wasn't adequate oversight, right? A small district with 150 students, give or take, didn't have the infrastructure to provide oversight. The audits didn't catch it. The accounting didn't catch it. The CalPAD system didn't catch it. So that's what we seek to rectify here today. Mr. McCarty?
Yeah, and I think that leads me to the bigger point. You know, I'm frustrated to hear the opposition saying, we don't like these bad actors, they make it bad on us, and we'll turn them into. But then when we come with reasonable oversight, oh, that's going to shut us out of business. And it's just like, we hear this over and over, and then we keep hearing examples over and over. And so that's what you get from not having proper oversight. And so I think your argument is very, very hollow. And I did want to allow the chair, or the chair, the author, and we have 3 authors here, to talk about one of the clarifying amendments. And I've received some emails from people here I know locally. And a lot of times people, as you know, they email you and tell you about the bill, and that you may support or author. And I always think, well, if my bill did that, I wouldn't support it, right? Because, you know, these pieces in there just aren't factual. But don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. So that's what we hear too often in this business. So if you, Mr. O'Donnell, can talk about the amendment that for small districts and the grandfathering clause, and how this won't be a shutdown for so many people who are talking to us today.
I'm sorry, could you clarify your question? I'm a little...
Yeah, there's an amendment that these non-charter-based schools that are currently authorized for a small district, a grandfathering piece as far as their ADA, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe could we have the committee staff outline what that piece is to help?
I can speak to it. If you can show me where it is in the analysis, I can speak to it.
The amendments are on page.
I just think this is an important thing. So I know we don't know all of these.
And I'm limited in what,
Yeah,
as
but-
chair, I'm limited on what I can
I know,
weigh in
but-
on, so I can speak to the analysis.
I think this would help us. So maybe
It's on page 27, page 22, and it's amendment number 7, at the
Yeah.
top of the page.
Yeah, but are you comfortable, Chelsea, to outline how we were able to address one of the main concerns we hear about this and the grandfathering issues?
Can,
Page 22, amendment number 7.
Page 22.
And I can speak to that, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I'll read it because that's pretty much what it does. It's pretty clear. It grandfathers in non-classroom-based charter schools currently authorized by school districts outside the ADA requirements embedded in this bill. So what we have in this bill is if you want to authorize a charter, you've got to be this big for this many students you're going to authorize, that big for that many students to authorize. And why that was put in here was the East San Diego County situation and others, wherein you have a very, very small school district that maybe have 100, 150 students, go ahead and authorizing to a charter school to have 10,000 students, 20,000 students. And again, those small school districts just don't have the infrastructure, the capacity to provide the oversight, the good accounting practices, the audits, et cetera, that need to take place. So what we did embedded in this bill was created a threshold, a progressive it's a progressive number of students, ADA, a district must have to approve a certain size charter.
Yeah.
So if you're a small school district, you could probably authorize a small number of charter school students. If you're a larger school district, you could authorize a larger number of charter school students. But again, that threshold, that progressive number is built into there to ensure that those districts have the infrastructure necessary to provide the oversight that thus far has really not been provided or led to situations like A3 in San Diego. So again,
that's
grandfather in
moving
means
forward.
if you're already in existence, you're okay, you're fine,
Yep.
you're going to stay, you're not subject to the new requirement. That's what grandfathering means.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any more questions, Mr. McCarty?
Nope.
Ms. Dolly?
section 38, I have multiple charters in my school and in my district, and I'm a huge proponent of parental choice and school choice, but charters for us are a necessity. This isn't if you don't want to go to the school down the street. We have kids that ride on the school bus for 45 minutes one way. So some of these restrictions just really won't work for them at all. But I have a very specific question for the section of 38. My nieces live in Modoc County, and they attend a charter school in Shasta County. So under AB 1316, what's going to happen on July 1st of 2022 to the thousands of students like my nieces who are currently enrolled in non-classroom-based charters who reside in an adjacent county?
Let me take a look at this, and give me 1 second.
Let me also say
Why
that.
don't you, Ms. Garcia, do you want to?
Yeah, so.
You're gonna have to respond, not me. So.
This is actually not specific to AB 1316 because under current law, existing current law, non-classroom-based charter schools cannot have facilities in adjacent counties. And so this bill, that issue there is not a result of this bill, but it's a result of existing current law out there. They may only have facilities in the district in which they are authorized.
So in general,
So
in the valley I live in, there's 3 counties within one area. So county lines, that's very burdensome for children who live in very rural frontier areas.
But I think if you look at the analysis, I think your situation, the situations you've cited, they've enrolled in a school in a different county. This
Yes.
bill doesn't preclude them from doing that, enrolling in a different county. So they would be fine.
No, yes, it does.
It does, okay, it does. I apologize.
but it's current law, I thought. It's not this bill, but existing current law already.
Wow, how would they be going to school right now if it's current law?
It could be that the current law's not being implemented.
Lack of oversight.
No, that's.
Could
yeah.
I directly address this? Because I have the same concern. Do you mind? I mean, great.
So Chelsea, can you, Chelsea's the committee consultant who wrote the analysis, and she's going to speak to the matter.
So current law specifies that non-classroom-based charter schools cannot have facilities or satellite facilities in adjacent counties unless they were approved by their local district. Okay, that was 2 years ago we passed that law. This bill would specify that the attendance boundaries for non-classroom-based charter schools would be the county in which they are authorized, because that's where they're allowed to have facilities.
And so, if I could follow up with that, I discovered this also, this issue of a charter school that has facilities in 2 counties, so actual online facilities, and yet, that's not normally legal. But if the county, if they sought approval, it then does become legal. So that's how this exists at this point in time. And so I'm one of the things that I've talked to the author about is looking at this as this moves forward in terms of trying to deal with those current schools in that situation. But
Yeah, Mr. Bennett did bring me an issue that he has found in Santa Barbara that I said we would discuss and seek to find a solution upon, and this may be the very issue that you're citing right now. I don't know if they're completely aligned, but I do know that we do have a topic that we need to discuss and work on associated with facilities and what county they're located, the next door county, et cetera. So that is a topic we need to discuss more. And that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about the bill and bring up issues that people aren't aware of or might not have contemplated before today, and that's why we're here today. Are we going to be able to solve that right now? No, but it is something we need to discuss.
So this is our first committee for this bill, and what I'm hearing is that the author is committed to continuing to discuss this issue. There seems to be the same overlap between Mr. Bennett and Ms. Stolly as we're moving forward. So we'll
And
have
I
more
would be a third
opportunities.
on that to look at amendment that could work this specific scenario out.
So I have a follow-up question on a clarifying question, I guess. The visitation, in-person visitation with your teachers, what is the requirement under this bill?
Let me give you, I want to give you the specific number because I already stated it in my presentation. But right now, no requirement. It's every 30 minutes every 3 days? No, it's every 3 days. Contact every 3 days. It's contact every 3 days.
Can that be virtual?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I don't have internet in my district, so can
Be phone? Can be phone?
can it be? I mean, this is
sorry?
legitimate that we don't have broadband in a good portion of my district. So, if it's a requirement to virtually touch base every 3 days, that isn't going to work for my district.
It could include phones as well, so a phone call.
How are they connecting now, I guess?
Hold on, wait,
Their parents.
we have a question, and go ahead with your question.
So that's a concern for me.
Oh,
because
okay, it's
that's
concern.
that's not a guideline or a requirement that would physically be workable for some of my students.
So,
And also, a lot of them will they take my sister in particular takes her kids, physically drives them to their teacher because that's what works for them. That's the model that works for them. But it isn't every week, and so. But that doesn't mean that the regulation and oversight isn't happening, because. So I guess there's quite a few things in this bill that just don't work for rural California, and I know it can't be only my district. There's other people that have rural parts of their district as well, Mr. Kiley, Mr. Bigelow, what goes on and on. So anyway, I definitely think there's some work to be done here, and I would like to engage in that process with you.
understood.
And so phone calls do not work either, because that's one of the way that you could interact also through the phone.
Depends on cell service.
Or
And
landlines.
you can drive out through my district with me sometime and check it out, but those are legitimate concerns.
Or landlines is another option too, right? We don't all have cell phones. I mean, I have been out there, and so I know that cell phone doesn't work in lots of places. But I do have a home in the mountains, and I have a landline. It has very limited internet, but I'm able to make just calls just fine. So that's an option also for interaction. I think at the end of the day, we want to give flexibility, but we want to make sure that we have quality and students' needs are being met. I was actually just tutoring one of our colleagues' kids yesterday, and the frustration they were having because they couldn't have any interaction with the teacher to answer some basic questions for them. And so we just want to make sure that we are able to ensure that the students are getting interaction, that's quality to answer questions, that ensure that they're progressing and getting a fair education.
Great, thank you. Others, Mr. Kiley. No, Mr. Kiley, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for the authors, actually. Of course, feel free to chime in if you'd like. I just have a few questions for two of the witnesses. First, for the representative of the District Attorneys Association, and then for the representative from the Charter School Association. So I appreciate your testimony and read your letter of support and your memo, which is a very impressive document, 33-page memo going through each of the provisions of this bill, or at least many of them, and explaining how they would have been helpful in preventing the scheme that your office uncovered in the McManus case. And you clearly did exceptional work in that case, and so I've given the opinion of your office a lot of weight in considering this legislation, and so I just want to make sure I have a clear sense of what your position is. I mean, to sort of summarize those documents and your testimony today, you believe that this bill would help protect the public against the sort of fraud that played out and led to the McManus case. Is that right?
Well, let me explain. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and for reading through the documents. We submitted to you folks documents that were related to our areas of what we saw occur, and our areas when we read through the bill that were related to the case that we saw occur. We're not in the position to put forward public policy as to all areas. There are certain areas of the bill that we weren't involved with, but the areas that we were involved with, we wanted to give information as to what we saw, and hopefully areas that you, as the legislature or assembly, can can solve some of these issues.
I see. And so your letter says you support the bill. In fact, I think it says you emphatically support the bill, or your office does. There's, of course, been hundreds of charter schools that have weighed in opposition to this bill, that have submitted letters in opposition, saying that this legislation would inhibit their ability to operate. And they cite many of the provisions that you also cite in your letter. And this is going to harm their ability to serve their families. What do you make of that? Do you have any reason to sort of doubt the...
Mr. Chair,
I will step in. I will. Listen, I talked to the DA from San Diego County yesterday, and we had a lengthy conversation about the bill and about what she brings to the table here today. And what she sought to do is bring some, I guess, prosecutorial expertise, not educational policy expertise to us today. So I'm not going to ask him to ask that question right now because, again, you're going into a lane that she doesn't see herself in. She's not going to bleed into California educational policy as a whole. But what she brought today was a gentleman who's very experienced in a case down in San Diego, and the case is important today because it speaks to what's going on across our state and how we today might address part of that. But again, I don't want him getting into educational policy, and that's what I believe you're attempting to ask him to do now. And
No, I'm not. I'm asking him whether you have reason to believe that this particular policy tool could have the effect of inhibiting not just illegal activity, but also legitimate activity.
Mr. Chair, point of order. Mr. Kiley is not in the courtroom here.
Do we not ask questions?
No, but you're trying to put a hypothetical in the witness's head. He's talking about what he feels about bringing accountability to that, and you're asking him about what the opposition thinks. That's not what he's here for, and this is not appropriate questioning. So I think, Mr. Chair, if you can.
It's not appropriate.
It's not. Listen, I'm going to ask the gentleman not to answer the question because I believe your question is relative to educational policy as a whole, and that's, as he has clearly stated, not his expertise and not why he is here today.
I don't know why you're afraid of the answer. Let the witness speak for himself.
Excuse me. Okay, it's been settled. I think you had another question for another individual in the room?
No, I had a couple more questions of this witness. I mean, they're weighing in on an education bill. I'm not asking them to opine on education policy.
Yeah, but Mr. Chair, he's asking him to give his opinion on what the opposition thinks.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you did. You're saying the opposition says this is going to shut people down. What do you think about what they say to say?
Okay, fine. Fair enough. I'll reframe my question.
Excuse me, hold on. Excuse me. Okay, hold on. Let's bring some order here.
Okay.
Okay. If you have an other question for this individual that is within his lane, if you will, right? I'll ask him to answer it. But I think you're bleeding into greater educational policy, and that's not his role here today.
Okay, maybe I'll just ask, what do you see as the scope of your testimony today so that I know what I should limit my questioning to?
I believe he already stated what his scope was here today. He
Well,
stated that when he, excuse me. Okay. He stated that when he came up here earlier, what his role was here today. And I want to respect that role because, look, he came up from San Diego.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I just like a reminder so that I can know what questions are within bounds of kind of what you see as the scope of your
Again,
testimony.
I believe he stated his scope, so ask him a question.
Can I please just get a reminder of what the scope of your testimony is?
Yeah, we're here to inform of what we saw in our case where we can, because I unfortunately have to remind you there's still some ongoing aspects of the case that are the legal challenges and the lack of oversight that occurs at the state level. So I'm not here to talk about all the policies of this bill and whether or not all those policies would be good or bad, but just the facts of the case and the issues that we saw.
And that the provisions you identify you believe would be effective or at least would help into making sure things like that don't happen again.
Correct.
And I take it, since this would probably be kind of outside of your lane, that you didn't consider whether there are other alternatives that would have been just as effective as those. You just kind of analyzed what was in front of you. Is that right?
We pointed out what we saw in our case, and one of the major aspects of it was the lack of oversight at the state level, the lack of following of the state funds, and then as it broke down to the individual levels, the fact that the oversight wasn't there all the way down to the auditor's office. And that because of that, unfortunately, money that should have gone to student education went to the folks that were running these bad actor schools and taking the money.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on the case.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I had a question for one other witness. Next witness. From the representative from the Charter School Association. Thank you for being here as well. I wanted to ask you about a portion of your letter of support where you said a package of bills passed in 2019 made comprehensive reforms to the accountability and transparency for all charter schools. Provisions of AB 1316, this bill, would blatantly violate the agreement reached through the negotiations on all these bills to limit further charter restrictions. So can you just, I think you alluded to this in your testimony as well.
Yep.
What exactly was that agreement? What was the nature of it?
Well, as you may recall, in 2019, 3 massive pieces of legislation that were intended to address especially some of these issues that you're talking about out of area authorizing, the conflict of interest issues that had not been resolved for 10 years, and we had been meeting in these rooms trying to come to reasonable compromises. SB 126 addressed all those issues with greater transparency in operations and conflict of interest prohibitions, improving public transparency. AB 1505, authored by Chair O'Donnell, increased authorizer discretion in chartering decisions and providing clear and specific criteria for charter school operations, including a broad array of additional measures specifically related to credentialing and security checks and many of those issues. And then 1507, AB 1507, also co-authored by Chair O'Donnell and Mr. McCarty, authored by Ms. Smith, addressed a lot of the issues that are precisely in full evidence here in your discussion that related to out-of-hour authorizing, the location of resource centers, where non-classroom-based schools could be operated, and a lot of authorizer transparency and oversight. The full brunt of those measures, just approved in 2019, haven't even gotten to the regulatory process for implementation yet.
So, but how does this bill violate any agreement? I mean, what does that mean?
When this package of bills was approved, we agreed that there would be a 2-year moratorium while additional measures precisely around non-classroom-based operations, a lot of the issues that are being addressed here, that we would pick this up in a collaborative manner at a later date. Certainly, the pandemic has made continued engagement and deep study very challenging in this year when every single school across California has been a non-classroom-based school. Let's remind ourselves of that. And our non-classroom-based charter schools have actually been leading the way in providing very high-quality instruction and modeling for and partnering with districts on how to do it well. However, by relitigating the issues of transparency, oversight, conflict of interest, all of those issues that we already put behind us and dumping them onto this vehicle, that is outside of the scope of what we said we would agree to and really undermines Governor Newsom's compromise. That is our view.
Well, I mean, is that really a fair criticism? I mean, who are the parties to this agreement that you're talking about?
I believe all the parties to the agreement were all of us that together signed that legislation with Governor Newsom, including all of labor, the management groups, many of the folks in this room.
Well, I mean, I didn't support that bill. 3 of the members of this committee weren't in the legislature at the time, so how can we, say that this bill really violates any agreement that would be? Is that really a fair criticism that you can somehow bind the legislature's future actions?
Well, certainly, the process of democratic engagement, it puts all of these issues up for collaboration and debate and continued engagement. But I do believe that when we want to actually target the issues that we would address in a later session, that we were intending to address those in a scoped and surgical manner to address the issues that were still left outstanding. and yet we're really relitigating old issues.
Okay. I mean, my view at the time was that this agreement, of course, wasn't going to be honored. If it was, it would be the only time in world history that appeasement has worked. So do you think that maybe the time has come to call a spade and to recognize that this bill is part of an effort at this Capitol to end charter schools in California?
Well, certainly that's the intent of 1316.
Is to end charter schools in California.
That under the guise of parity and equity, we are losing the very soul of what makes good charter schools successful at dealing especially with the most marginalized and most vulnerable students. We were the ones, like I said, we were the first to raise the issues.
Please summarize.
We were the first to issue alerts that there were problems with A3. It is certainly not true.
You're not answering to his question any longer. So do you have another question for him?
I don't. That was my last question. I have one more comment, and I want to thank you. It seems like we're in agreement, and I think that fact just needs to be acknowledged. It's either it's transparency, it's accountability, it's fraud, whatever the purported justification might be for this bill or the next bill. That's what's going on here. There's an effort to end charter schools in California, and that's what needs to be fought against on this bill, and the many others like it that we're sure to see in the future if we don't take a stand now.
Well, I appreciate your questions, and certainly when we're talking about parity, there's a list of items that are not equal.
Thank you. Okay. Again, I just want to be clear that AB 1505, author O'Donnell, okay, established a 2-year moratorium on the establishment of non-classroom-based charters until January 1st, 2022. That's in the analysis here. Why did it do that? As she has stated, so we could work on other issues. That's why we're here today. It's that simple. Ms. Garcia.
Yes, I find it insulting that trying to ensure we have parity and good government and we stop abuse is seen as an attack on charter schools. These bills apply to both districts and charter schools out there. I will say that those bills that were referenced did not cover any of the abuse that we saw by A3 out there, and so the need to continue to address, the situation is out there. I thought it was interesting that the last person talked about that it's when they want to address these issues, and it shouldn't be when they want to address these issues. It should be that we address them now because the need is now and the abuse is going on now.
Thank you. Mr. McCarty.
Yeah, I just want to note, I think Mr. Kiley honestly helped it with the issue that that there was an acknowledgement when those bills were signed, and the governor's statement, and we were in the room, is like, hopefully we can put these issues to rest. It wasn't the Oslo Accord and written in sandstone or what have you. And that what we found is that we are supposed to be good stewards of taxpayer money, and the DA of San Diego found fraud, and there were some issues that weren't covered. And so it's our responsibility to look at weaknesses of state law and respond. They're saying this kills all charter schools. We're saying it does not. It brings about fair accountability. That's why we have a legislative process. We have a hearing today. We'll continue to push forward. But in our view, it allows good operators to stay in existence. We know that during the pandemic, a lot of families have realized this works for them, and that will continue in charter schools or traditional public schools. But this is not about ending charter schools as we know it, and that's just ridiculous. And with that, I think we should call the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. You wanted to comment?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the interest in trying to call a vote. But I do have some comments, and
Yeah, go ahead.
Appreciate your forbearance while I get through this. This is an important and significant issue. I've had many conversations with people while I'm trying to do my research in preparation for today's hearing. And first, I want to acknowledge I appreciate the Charter School Association representatives that I met with who gave me specific aspects of the bill that they had concerns about, and they did that far enough in advance that I had time to examine those issues. I also appreciate my meeting with over 100 charter school parents on a Zoom who I think did a strong job of reinforcing for me how important their children's education is to them and how much they value their current charter school experience. Additionally, I appreciate staff, particularly Chelsea's, steady and nearly round-the-clock effort to be available and to patiently respond to my questions about clarification. So thank you for that. And Finally, I appreciate today, I don't know how many of you noticed, but it was the president of the Santa Barbara Unified School District, that's the public school district, speaking in opposition to this bill, Santa Barbara being a major school district in my district. But clearly, Kate Ford's testimony identifies that there has been a serious, that the series of compromises over the years has led to much less animosity and a stronger bond between charter schools and public schools. I've been surprised at how many public school administrators have talked to me about concerns that they have about this bill. And that improved relationship between public schools and charter schools is beneficial for everybody and helpful to maintain. And so I appreciate her testimony and helping to make it clear that that's out there and why they have some issues. So as I evaluate this bill, my goal, I just have one goal, and that's just good government. Just try to convince me that it's good government, I'll support the bill. And some people, we've heard it said here, believe this bill will bring an end to nearly all online charter schools, and that is, I believe, the most important concern being expressed by the parents that are communicating to me. Hey, this is going to bring this to an end. A parent even sitting on this committee. The issues that most generate this concern about closure are these, as far as I see it. The requirement that there be a physical presence for online learning, the increase of the fee from 1% to 3%, the adjustments to the funding formula, moving it to a formula that's based on how much how much in-person instruction you have, and then also the restriction of the charter schools, which was being restricted to just one county. There were also some issues regarding process followed in the advancement of the bill, and I think the discussion that we've had here it lets me identify the process questions as the weakest argument that I've heard from the opposition in terms of doing that. I certainly, coming here, don't feel like I'm bound by something the governor said 2 years ago, saying I hope there's peace for a while in terms of moving forward. Most of the changes advanced by this bill, I believe, are intended as ways to incentivize a movement to a healthy combination of online and in-person learning. I want to emphasize that. Everything that I'm seeing in this bill is trying to incentivize or regulate, right, some healthy combination of online and in-person learning. And there are individual student exceptions to this principle to this principle of a combination of online and in-person, but certainly the evidence is strong that that is superior to just simply online instruction only, as has been identified. So for me, the question in front of us are these. For schools that desire to use taxpayer dollars, is it appropriate to use a combination of incentives and regulations to try to push those schools to have a healthy combination of online and in-person, or to leave the status quo where they could do very little in-person, if any? And then the second question, I think, is do the provisions of this bill do that? Do they appropriately push for online and in-person without having negative consequences that are greater than the benefits that could come from that? And I believe that the issues of requirement for a physical location, increasing the fee from 1% to 3%, and the modifying of the funding formula will, for most schools, cause some real adjustments. There will adjustments that have to be made. But I believe, from what I've been able to see, that those adjustments can be made by the schools if they're schools that are making a good faith effort to meet the needs of their students and also follow this spirit of compromise that has evolved over the years that you guys have been battling, that's embedded in the law regarding charter schools and their relationship with public schools. For example, the fee increase from 1% to 3%, that money can only be used for more oversight, and if it's not used for oversight, the fee can't be charged, correct? The fee will be less. So it's only if you need it for the oversight. And certainly today, I think a good case has been made that more oversight is needed. There are all kinds of things. This is complicated to do, this kind of oversight. It's complicated in normal schools. If you go to online schools with the lack of physical presence and the ability to take Little League, and do registration online. So we need more robust oversight simply because the technology has changed and we're going to online schools. So I think almost everybody agrees we need more oversight. So a fee increase to help pay for that oversight does not strike me as inappropriate, particularly if it's only allowed to be used for the oversight. The requirement of a physical location is a challenge for some of these online schools, but I want to point out that charter online schools have significantly more flexibility than traditional schools when it comes to the online physical presence location that they would have to develop. So today I still have some questions about the impact of the county restrictions. I appreciate that the chair is willing to work with and explore those as he's expressed. And then finally, I just want to say that as a result of COVID, online instruction has arrived for mainstream America. Like it or not, we got exposed to it. It is out there. And we, as far as I can tell, have not really had in the California legislature comprehensive legislative effort to address this evolving field of education. So the question is, and I believe that the overall provisions of this bill provide a common sense effort to try to provide regulations needed to support the credibility of the online charter schools that are making a good faith effort. You've already seen all charter schools get tarnished by the A3 scandal, all of them. So I would hope that people would look at this as saying, in the spirit of the compromise that was out there, if we get the appropriate regulations and we do it in an appropriate way, we actually can increase the credibility of those people that are making a good faith effort to provide quality education and follow the spirit of compromise that's been developed with proper safeguards. Final thing that I would like to make is ultimately, if you want to use taxpayer dollars for a for-profit venture, the burden of proof is on you. And I just want to repeat that. If you want to use taxpayer dollars for a for-profit venture, schools use taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers, they don't have any choice whether they're going to pay their taxes for their local school. So, but when they do that, they expect a lot of oversight to make sure that and so when you have for-profit companies coming in, the burden of proof is on them. And right now, I believe that the legislative and educational leadership in Sacramento is saying, well, we believe in a combination of online and in-person, but we're not so convinced that we're just ready to just say it's okay to go complete online without any appropriate oversight. So if you don't want the restrictions, if you want more flexibility, then you can't ask for the taxpayer dollars at this point in time in the conversation. So this is the beginning of the conversation about how do you regulate online schools, how do you do it right. I respect the good faith effort that's been made to try to get us here, and I respect the good faith effort made by the charter school advocates, particularly the parents, who are concerned that this might be somehow the death knell of that. I don't think that's the case. I want to do good government. I'm not trying to be part of an effort to close all the charter schools in California. So I'll be supporting this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Lee.
I just want to thank the constant leadership of our chair as well as the author, Christina Garcia, on making sure that we are holding our taxpayer dollars accountable when we're educating our students. I don't want to retread the great ground that my colleague from Southern California has already made, but I just wanted to say when it is appropriate in the process, I would like to request to be added as a co-author to the bill as well.
So now we'll ask the author to close. I'll just quickly pass it on to Ms. Garcia, but one thing I am most notable of the conversation today is that people think this bill is about closing online charter schools. You're being told that. That is not factual. That is absolutely not true. Will it give them different rules to follow? Accountability, good auditing practices, good government practices, yes, but that does not close any online charter school. And this was all part of an agreement we made 2 years ago to put this effort off for 2 years. Thus, the moratorium was placed on new online charter schools. So now is the time to have that conversation. That is what was contemplated 2 years ago. That is what we are doing in this hearing room today. Ms. Garcia.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Bennett for his comments. I think he did a good job of summarizing a lot of discussion. We have a lot of passionate individuals on both sides of this issue. I think we can all agree that good quality education, transparency, and accountability are important. So I hope moving forward we can focus on that to try to ensure that tax dollars are protected while still ensuring that parents have choice, ensuring that our special ed students have the quality that they need, and all of our students, including our most marginalized students, have a quality education to close that educational gap. I respectfully ask for an aye vote and encourage individuals to come with productive amendments or suggestions of how we could reach our common goals. Thank you.
Great, thank you. With that, we'll go to the secretary. I don't have the motion before me, so.
The motion is do pass as amended to appropriations. O'Donnell?
Aye.
O'Donnell, aye. Kylie?
No.
Kylie, no. Bennett? Aye. Bennett, aye. Dally? No. Dally, no. Lee? Aye. Lee, aye. McCarty? Aye. McCarty, aye. Quirk Silva? Aye. Quirk Silva, aye. The bill has 5 votes.
The bill is out. Thank you, Ms. Garcia.